Edges are one of the hardest things to understand as a response from Gabriel to the conversation we had about edges. And I was showing, in that conversation, we were talking about ridges on a painting and just joints where where you're painting wet into wet, a dark meets a light, and you're drawing there, and you get these ridges. And I took it to be fairly limited to that. But when he makes that point that the edges are the hardest thing to understand, I thought it might be useful just for 2 seconds before I go into another technical matter to just talk about the variety of things that edges are about, and I may have alluded to them, but all this stuff, everything we're talking about today, everything I will talk about as we spend time together, is going to be about the visual impression. And so when it comes to edges, it's the same thing. However, there's also a craft portion of this thing, right? And that is, for example, the ridges. When you start creating ridges and you have problems with sort of funny little echoes of former shapes, in the wrong place, say in the shadow area, it's quite a problem, and it's a problem to the painting. So they're better, so they're best ways when it comes to ridges, but the visual and the edges is an interesting one. And so when I'm looking at a painting, when I'm looking at the world in front of me, and I see a dark meeting a light, I observe, as soon as I go over there to make a shape, I observe immediately what the painted edge would actually look like. So it was already, this is actually getting a concept of it, that very same idea again, getting a concept also of the edge quality. And so that'd have to do with the sharpness of edge. And so I refer to, so edges have paper sharpness, like you could get cut on an edge like that. Tarbell is famous for having done that from time to time. It was referred to actually at one point as the Tarbell edge, or that Tarbell edge. And but it was very much that. It was just a harsh cutout. And I have found that there are such things in painting, but it's more often that even a harsh cutout edge is less harsh than you think. And so you don't get to do it just out of a book, or just however sharp you can possibly make it with a fine brush and loaded with liquid paint. You can get really, 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 really sharp. But a second, so there's an element of sharpness, and that sharpness at the edge is all a function of other sharpnesses in the painting. There is one in the world of the visual order, so to speak, and I say everything is with visual order. You talk about chroma, there's the most intense one. Well, when you talk about edges, and I'm talking about now the visual, not the way paint is working, but visual edges, there is a sharpest one in every painting, so to speak. There may be two that are competing for the honor, but so when I say edge in that way, we know we're talking about the effect of sharpness. Literally, where two values of two different values meet up, and those places where you can articulate shape. Another aspect of it, of course, is that those shapes are varied all the way down. If you're looking down even some passage of my shirt here, you'll see that there's a more lost area, a more sharp-edged area, and another one that's like it but not quite as sharp. And that's not unusual. And another one of the things that's missed when we're talking about edges is that when you have low contrast areas, the edges still have to be considered purely. In other words, you have to take edges and say, how are you in the world of the edges? And in that world is fascinating because you have to, and this is possibly where Gabriel's talking about his difficulties, but in that world you have to actually say, I don't care how contrasty it is. I'm comparing the sharpness now. And, so I have this mentality about when I'm working on a thing, like chroma. I pop up in my brain what I call a chroma window, and I analyze everything. This chroma, that chroma, this chroma, that chroma. So who's on first and all the rest, and where does it land in the order of 1 to whatever in chroma. And this is true also of lost and found. There's the most found and the most disappearing joint, where you might say, we think of lostness as areas where two objects actually meet and create no contrast by value. So we call that a lost area. But there are areas, though, in the world of sharp, that when you pop up a window and say, this is the sharpness window, you're just comparing sharpness, literally. And this is where you must keep your eyes wide open, and you have to see the thing as if it were on a screen, flat, and you have to just, across the screen, compare sharpnesses. And those sharpnesses where values meet are, say, one of the keys to really getting edges. So as I said, the other part of that is that the painterliness of the edge. So you can, if you just lay a dry painting, a wet dark against a already dry white, you'll get a certain kind of an edge. It won't be a particularly attractive one. Partly the reason why a craftsman-like painter will say, if you're not painting wet into wet, you're not painting. Because there's an expectation that the edges will actually be what I call fluid. So a wet edge is far more beautiful and far more integrated with the surface than one that's not that way. And, Impressionists are interesting, and I think if there's one thing that, interesting precisely about edges in one way, and that is that we as students, we're so fixated on the look of nature from distance X that we would sacrifice anything. And that's not a painterly approach. And you do find that over time, most of the Boston School guys aren't like that. They actually do paint wet into wet. It's a fluid wet, decamp being, of course, the most strikingly beautiful of them. But at least on those days. But so you don't want to be just good from back at the distance, the proper viewing distance, but you also, like in the advice of Alfred Stevens, again, that great Belgian painter, you want to say, and how does it look when you walk up close to it? Now, paintings that are made to be seen, small paintings are made to be seen closer. They're gonna, if you have bad habits that way, they're gonna really show up in those kinds of paintings. So from that point of view, and to all you sightsizers, I frequently recommend that a student will bring a painting forward and paint passages of it from time to time up here where they can actually see how crappy their edges actually are, because that's an aesthetic experience for people, and so it goes. Yeah. So the question of edges, it continues to be an interesting one, but don't confuse edges and their sharpnesses with ridges and that sort of thing. And even the sharpnesses, you don't even necessarily compare that. You don't actually compare that with the craft of wet into wet edges and how to make the most fluid edges. They're different categories, and everything you're learning to do as you mess around with paint and try to make likenesses is escape from fuzzy thinking. The thinking that color is, just get the color, and you don't know that the color is made of value, a chroma, an intensity, and a red, yellow, or blue, a hue. So if you don't know that, you can't easily analyze your problems of the world visually in front of you. You can't easily either analyze it or correct it. Once you do, though, once you get that into your ballpark where you start working and saying, well, what part of this thing is the problem? The problem's over here. What part? So it's a color problem, but is that the chroma problem, or is it the value or is it the value, or what is the problem, right? And in each case, you have to pop up the larger window that I talk about, that larger set of things that goes together, which is literally the values world versus the chroma world versus the hue world, the relative red, yellow, and blueness of a thing. So, and by the way, I'm in this conversation. I'm going to refer now more. I've never referred to him much before, but this guy, I do recommend, if you can find it, to have a look at the Max Meldrum conversation, because he really does. I don't want to say synthesize, but he really does try to get you to look at the world as it really exists, which is ocularly, it's to your eye, right? It's color relations, value relations. In one sense, you could argue that it's just color relations. If you consider that color is values, chroma and hue, then you could argue that all you see is color. There's an interesting conversation, and there are things about that I will discuss with you. And I wanted to again thank Jazz for suggesting the book. I'd never heard of it before in my life till a week or two ago. But it sounds like his critiques are all exactly what I give to students. And so it's very worthy of your time. Claussen's, as I said before, a couple others really do sound like me, but this is the stuff that the world visual is made out of. So if you have any inclination to be an impressionist, which really only doesn't mean Monet, that's just one element, one idea related to impressionism, but the idea of being able to paint what you see in front of you with authority, he's a good read. He's a very, very terrific read. Okay, and one other point on this one today. You can see the weather's improved. I got flies now. There's one from Richard that he asked me to talk about my choice of canvas because he says he's been using a Claussen single. Oh, that's where that spelling came from. That's Claussen, actually. I made a mistake in one of these videos and spelled Claussen, our Claussen, completely wrong with 2 S's, meaning the guy at the Royal Academy. But it's Claussen's canvas is spelled Claessens. Anyway, but he says, so he uses, he's trying to figure out why his paintings are drying in so quickly. And he says he uses single-primed linen with Grumbacher 1 Newton paints, no medium other than a little linseed oil if needed for the lay-in. And when dry, the thing is completely sunken in and matte, especially the darks. And he says, can this be because the paint is applied too thinly? And looking for suggestions. No, I can speak with, if you want to call it that, authority on the matter. I use Claussen's. One of my students is why he uses it as well. And those paints are terrific paints. And I only use linseed oil, and mine don't dry in. So watch out for what other little thing you might be doing, possibly including, by the way, painting thinly. But I've never found it to be a thin factor. I don't really think that's possible. So all those things being considered, the only thing I know for sure that causes that is any small amount of terps. Just don't use terps. Don't think of linseed oil as a medium, and terps is just something you use to clean your brush, and then you keep painting with it with terps on your brush. Terps is a cutter. It absolutely will make things go matte, and of course it wrecks the color quality and all sorts of things. So even if it's accidentally on your brush, get it out of your brush. Make sure your brushes are dry when you start, and don't put any terps in them. Only use oil in your brushes, and you will not have that problem. So. But yeah, by the way, Claussen's that single prime canvas is a really good canvas for someone painting the way we paint. It's not ideal for somebody using little soft brushes and being really fine. It's actually for people using the bristle brushes, standard old ways of working, and searching out the big impression. It's a very forgiving canvas. Takes the paint beautifully, and takes enough layers for even a student to be able to, maybe after a bit, be able to manage it in their work. I know that when I was a student, I'm not particularly interested in selling particular brands or anything, but we used Frederick's and a lot of others, and we tried a lot of things. There's a Russian one that I've used even more recently. It's a very, very rough textured thing, and I was using it because I was copying the John White Alexander that I mentioned before, the Isabel and the Pot of Hazel, and that canvas is so rough. And if you look at John White Alexander's work in general, it is really, really interesting. It's burlap times 2 or something, you know what I mean? So, but all these are fun, interesting canvases. I didn't have a problem. I did have an odd problem of a sort with the Russian one. What is the name of that one? I'm not going to try hard to remember it. And it was a bit of a dry-in problem, oddly enough. But use oil prime canvas. Use it. I do recommend single primed in this particular case because I don't like losing that much surface, that much tooth. And you lose, and if you get a double primed one, it's going to, particularly for a student, I don't recommend it. Anyway, well, that's the story there on that one, and so I hope you enjoyed that. And I'll see you next time. Would you please do try to remember to comment, share, particularly share and subscribe, and we'll see you in the very next one. All right.